So we are recording, yes, and welcome to the clearing, please. A man I've been very excited to talk to. This is Jack Klaff, ladies and gentlemen, smiling
Thank you very
beautifully.
much. I love the way you said please. It's like those radio producers. Good luck in the studio, please, or let it be good, please.
It's more of my it's more of my daughter's vernacular, where she's got into the habit of saying, "And we're recording, please." She likes to elongate the e sound.
Yes, please, please. Oh, please. The best note I ever got from a producer after the director said we're going to do this, the producer said, "Don't fuck it up."
That is a great. I've used that mantra many a times, and it's been whispered in my ear. Don't fuck it up many a time. So we're not here to fuck it up. This is going to be a glorious conversation. So, Jack, why I've decided to ask you if you'd be willing to be brought into the clearing is you may not know this, but you were, when I was first drama teacher training back at the Central School of Screech Trauma, and I'm talking circa 82 to 86 was my phase and my period there, you were the first one-man show that I went to see where I was completely enamoured by your ability to completely and utterly hold the stage. You know, I know you're a one-man show specialist, but your vocal dexterity, your character dexterity, you know, you were a real education for me on a number of occasions, and it must have been in London. I don't know the actual play that I saw, but what I remember you for is the fact that you were an actor who utterly commands the stage. And so that makes you, to say the least, impressive. I also have followed your career, as I saw a reviewer did recently. Someone was saying that I've been, following this man's work for over 30 years, and it's always a pleasure. This is a reviewer called Louise Penn, I think it was, Performances of the Year in London. I don't know who that is, but I thought, gosh, that's an interesting resonance, because you're someone I've known of since I did my drama teacher training before I Bristol Old Vic theatre trained. Subsequently, I know that we've got that in common too. And then more recently, I've been happily plundering your timeline of Facebook because you're a prolific cartooner in cartoons that you source from the world over. And I've been putting them into my own Facebook group. And I call it Jack Klaff Gold whenever I post it, in that I've been plundering the memes of the world. And particularly, if I may, and if you'll forgive this expression, I've been raping your timeline regularly in order to then put it into hashtag LOLvirus, which is about spreading a little happiness. Comedy is catharsis in times of adversity. Big ramble, but it's my great, great pleasure to welcome you to the clearing, Jack Klaff.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. What an immense build-up. I have to say that my daughter is bilingual, and when she was very small, she once said, "Shall we rape the cheese?" She meant râper, but, take whatever you want. I mean, the thing is that it's with cartoons, it's really important that one credits the people, and the ability of a cartoonist really to take an issue and really do something with it is tremendous. I had a real friendship with a cartoonist called Mel Kalman, who did a lot for the Times, did a lot of political stuff. You know, there's one bit where he's got politicians and talks, and this politician talks, and this politician talks, and he said, "Whatever happened to listen?" So that's really what you're about, listening, first of all. And it was good that you started, because it was good practice for me to listen, although it's difficult to hear lovely stuff about oneself, because you just want to go on, you just want to move on and always look at something new. I'll tell you one other cartoon of Mel's, my beloved friend, and that was somebody goes into a kind of a medical place, and he says, "Have you got anything for the human condition?" So having said that, here we are, and I hope we'll go through stories and that kind of thing. I suppose what viewers and listeners need to know is that we went to the same school, though I'm considerably older than you are.
And so
we're Bristol Old Vic people. So you go ahead and ask what you ask, and let's have a talk. Yeah.
Sure. And in terms of your own biography, I'm sure you're really, really well known to many people who will be listening. But a South African-born actor, writer, academic. You're also impressive that you've been on TED Talks as well. You know, if you just Google Jack Klaff, you do go to a complete sort of goldmine of experience. So you have a rich seam of alchemy and gold, which is what we're also going to be talking about. So there are some storytelling metaphors and constructs that I want to draw us through. The first of which is of itself a clearing. Now, I've always thought of coaching as being about giving somebody a damn good listening to. that's how the idea got born. I'm not here to coach you in any shape or form, but I got intrigued with the idea of bringing someone to a sort of innovative, clear space where they can think clearly. My own clearing is like a comedy improvisational theatre in the round type space because of my love of comedy improvisation. But my first question to you, Jack, is what's your clearing, metaphorically or literally, for you?
Yeah, I mean, I lied to you actually because I said there's a few things I can't really encapsulate quickly, and I didn't mention this. I mean, if you said to me, which places have been very wonderful for you, I'd have to say Cape Town in South Africa. I'd have to say Princeton, New Jersey, where, one can be reflective. San Francisco is marvelous. Greece can be wonderful. But, where I'm speaking from now, this is a study, in a sense, I've been very lucky. I'm not boasting. This really isn't a boast. I'm very lucky. My mother lived to the age of 100 years and 7 months, and she never complained. She was a very positive person. And I'm just lucky. I'm a positive person. And the clearing is very often right inside me. So when I'm in London, and we've lived away from London for quite a while, but now that I'm back living in London, this space, this study, that's a tremendous way for me to just go anywhere in the world. And also, before this pandemic, I would find a cafe. I have certain corners in certain cafes where I can go and just go anywhere. People come in and out of my vision. Some of them I know, they'll wave to me and so on. So the clearing is really in my heart. And right now the clearing is right here, right now.
And how you said that, by the way, was so beautiful. That sounded like it was the moment for our first song, where you were going to do a Dolly Parton or something.
Yes, exactly. I was going to do a Dolly Parton. So I think the clearing is a wonderful idea. It so happens that where I am, which is southeast London, it's not far from Ruskin Park. And so one can go to Ruskin Park. We know that Ruskin did a lot of writing around there. We know that Mendelssohn wrote wonderful pieces of music under trees there. You just go a little further and you're in Dulwich. There's a school there where both Woodhouse and what's his name, the thriller writer, The Big Sleep. You know
Now
who I
you're
mean.
testing me. Him, yes.
Yes, him, that guy. the great thriller, one of the great thriller writers of America. These people, you know, to make a long story short, I'm very lucky. I have this wonderful study, and I just come here, and in my mind, I can go all around the world, indeed all around the universe, because I've been lucky enough to encounter physicists, people who understand the universe far more than I do. So the clearing is right here, right now.
Beautiful answer. And the clearing is within. I love that. It links so beautifully to, in order to lead from without, you need to lead from within. And so getting your own ducks in line about who I am and what it is I'm bringing to the world is a lovely, very precious way of starting from an inner calm. I like that.
Can I tell you a couple of quick stories about leadership, and they're relatively new. One is somebody wrote a play about this. So these people are in some sort of conflict, and they're in this hideout and so on, and they sit down for a meal, and one of the guys, could be a woman, says, it doesn't really matter. The gender's not important. So the leaders made the food, and then the leaders helping them all, and the leaders giving them all the food and everything. And one of them says, "Wait a second, you're the leader, and you're serving us our food." And she says, "It's not a but, it's an and. I'm the leader and I'm serving you the food." And the other thing, very quickly, I was lucky enough to film for Intelligence Squared, an organization I worked with for a while. I was lucky enough to film a conductor, and he was teaching conductors how to be conductors. They were on the way, and this man, Ben Zander, runs the one of the orchestras in Boston, and this young conductor was he was waving his arms and he was almost like beating the musicians into submission. And Ben Zander, the conductor, said, wait, they're not galley slaves. Please come and sit down. He said, these are all very, very beautiful musicians. He said, ladies and gentlemen, now it wasn't an orchestra, it was a band that was gathered, different instruments, but not a full orchestra, to teach the conductors how to conduct. And he said to the musicians, ladies and gentlemen, would you play this piece of music by Mahler? Would you play it the way you want to play it? And they played it absolutely beautiful. And then Ben Zander said, do you see how well they play without us? Now, we should only come in and do anything if we can improve on that. And it's a wonderful metaphor for me for, what leadership is in the arts. If you're going to be a director or anything like that, let them do what they want to do, and then you come in if you can add something. A very good principle in family life and in leadership and so on is, if one criticism, there's got to be 37 years. I'll try that again. I don't know if you're going to edit it, but anyway, one criticism, 37 words of praise.
Okay, so there's a lovely balance of humility there, and about the idea of leaders being enablers rather than didactic forces to push change. So there's something really rich there about the humility of a leader being the feeder.
Yes, and there's so many things that people complain and complain and complain. There's so much to complain about at this time. But I would say this is a time for real reflection and for real learning. And you just have to look around the world and you just have to see who's doing a decent job as a leader, who's doing a great job as a leader, and who's really bad. It may well be, and I hope it is the case, that Donald Trump loses and that a major factor will have been the coronavirus. I don't know that he is going to lose. I suspect he might win. But if you look at, say, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who absolutely understood the situation, said what needed to be done, has won another term handsomely, and those kind of things, you can actually see it in action. And there's lots of examples of that. Of course, opinions differ and so on. But, I've been very lucky in a way. I did well at school. I was an officer in the South African Army, actually.
Okay.
I've thought a lot about leadership, but I'm not a leader. I'm a maverick. I'm outside these things. I have directed from
time
to
time. There's the notion of the secret's out, we're all leaders, because obviously you're being a thought leader at this moment and taking us down all sorts of really interesting resonances of leadership. And how to lead so that others want to follow is interesting in this binary world, because, the world is utterly split at the moment. Trump, schmump, Brexit, schmexit. We've become incredibly binary. And as we know, it's much more sophisticated than that. So I'm really enjoying your riffs on the theme of leadership.
That's right. And, I'm old enough to remember when Robert Mugabe was, wow, what an important, really amazing person.
Did you meet him?
I never did. But I knew a lot of people in Africa and elsewhere, all races, colors, creeds, and so on. And they were saying, particularly, knowledgeable people from that region, that's to say, what is now Zimbabwe and the Northern Transvaal. And not everyone was a lefty like me. I'm an anarchist, really, in the sense that I do believe that the curse of humanity is the external compulsion. We will only really develop as a species when spontaneously we do what we should do, basically.
My own perception of you based on that, rather than you being an anarchist, is you're more of a maverick or an outlier with a super objective perspective that I enjoy, of being outside looking in, which is partly how I can surprise people in when I coach them. It's the idea of just getting up in their grill in a way that sort of slightly surprises them, because I'm an outlier. I have a super objectivity in no agenda other than helping people get to be into a clearer place. So back to the clearing, if you like. So I don't think of you as being I enjoy the fact that I see you're not the norm. You're not just a conformist.
No, but I mean, I'll conform or not conform. It's not like, you can deliberately be non-conformist and then, in the sense, you're conforming. But what people said about Mugabe was he's actually following. He's leading, but he's leading because he understands where to go. So he's really being guided by them in terms of how they want to be led. My son always says, he's all grown up now, but he says, that my dad's an anarchist, but within very, very, restricted boundaries. And I worked with a guy. I worked in a think tank at one stage, and there was a maverick. I've worked a lot with mavericks, and lucky enough to have worked with rich mavericks. And that guy, his wife said to me, yes, he's an anarchist as long as he's the boss. So
lovely. So just bringing you back to the clearing, if I may. So thank you for inviting us into what is a clearing within. So the idea is, what we take from that is I'm going to appear in your clearing now with a tree. So I hope we can not milk this too much. I'm not going to shove a tree up there, but it's the idea of coming into this big scape where we're going to shake a tree to see which apples fall out within your clearing. And the apples take the form of this storytelling exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that I asked you to prepare before we spoke, which I appreciate you will have done. And thank you for taking notes as you said you would. And the construct is 4 things that have shaped you, Jack Klaff, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that never fail to grab your attention, and then 1 quirky or unusual fact about you that we couldn't possibly know until you tell us. We're going to just shake the tree now. Don't panic, Mr. Manry. You don't have to download the whole tree in one shake. It's up to you to interpret, to take us along whichever route or path you'd like to, shaking those apples out of your tree. So how would you like to start?
Well, let's start with the 4 things that shaped me, in no particular order, because it's sort of chronologically, but not really organized. So the first and undoubtedly the most important thing is this. In the 1960s, my uncle and aunt, I was a kid in South Africa, and both my uncle and aunt were arrested. So, as I've said many times, they clearly weren't naughty, but they went to jail. And their conduct, their whole way of living, has shaped me almost more than any other people I've ever known. First of all, because they stood up against apartheid. This was unusual among white people. The fact that they were not black did not stop them from saying, this is our fight. In the Black Lives Matter discussions that I've heard, there's a great deal of disquiet and distrust when white people center themselves. I don't think that I'm centering my aunt and uncle to say that they gave their lives for the dismantling of apartheid. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that Grandpa, whom I never knew, my grandfather, he was around, but he died when I was very, very little. I really didn't know him. He always thought that my aunt and uncle wouldn't make it, that their love affair was doomed. He was older, he was political, and yet they lived together for nearly 50 years, except when, especially my uncle, but when either of them or both of them were in prison.
Gosh.
And then they were under house arrest, and they died the same weekend.
Wow.
And their
so they had a
banning
common
orders
cause,
were lifted.
A common cause, a common purpose.
Common cause, common purpose. I never knew love like that. I saw my aunt on one occasion. He was about to be released, and there was a sort of bus station in Johannesburg. Lots of ozone smell, lots of smoke and so on. And she was sitting there with a ciggy, as she very often did, and a cup of foamy coffee. Not my favorite, but there she was. And she must have been in her 40s. She was like Juliet. I've never seen love like that. And so that shaped me. It shaped me because of their love. It shaped me because they didn't complain. It shaped me because of their integrity and bravery, and their belief in a better world.
And were they, in terms of the relationship to you, you mentioned uncle and aunt. So whose sibling were they, your mum's or your dad's?
So my dad had 2 siblings. My dad had an aunt. I'm so sorry, my aunt. I'm being Freudian there. My dad's pretty sister, Anne, married this dissident, but my dad's other sibling, and this also shaped me in a way, was a poet, and he couldn't cope with life. And in fact, when I was about 3 or 4, he had a breakdown. So every Sunday, my dad, who's a very hardworking man, would go between the mental institution one Sunday and Pretoria Central Prison to visit another relative the other day. So that's the first one. I'm going to move on because I want to give you other things that have shaped me. And I think the second thing that shaped me was my love affairs. I've been very lucky. I've had some absolutely wonderful partners. But I want to mention the first one because South Africa was an extremely repressed country and I was in an extremely repressed neighborhood where people got married when they were, 20. I've got friends who are still married, who married when they were teenagers, and I've got others who've had a series of divorces and so on. And I had a love affair with an older woman who taught me so much about so much. And I think that shaped me both in terms of how I view sexuality, but also how I view the good things in life. I had never really had eaten snails or eaten, raw meat, or there were so many things that I hadn't had the good life. And by the way, as I'm talking about the good life, I can remember the author who went to Dulwich High School and ended up in LA. He had a relationship with an older woman, and his name was Raymond Chandler.
Thank you for putting this.
And that's my sort of Chandler thing, of this inspiring person who shaped me in terms of understanding. See, when I was a kid, my mother didn't let me go to sex lessons because she thought I was too young. And so I spent a lot of my life trying to get into that sex class, and that was my sex class. The third thing that I would have to say that still shapes me, is my children. Obviously, I have 2 children. There's a gap between them. Different mums, by the way, all cordial and all friendly. So my son is almost 40 and has 1 child, another one on the way, and I have a grandchild, and that'll shape you. And of course, both of my children keep me in shape. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's really tiresome, but they've taught me stuff about their music, stuff about their art, stuff about their perspective on life. I'm not saying they keep me young. I'd never be so arrogant as to say that, but they keep me alert and full of humor,
Do
I
they get
suppose.
on well together, even though they're from different mums?
Yes, they do. Well, they have a certain, they're not uncritical, shall we say, but they have a very close, very loving, very supportive relationship, and they take the piss, and everyone's taking the piss out of everyone else, and
Yeah,
I wouldn't have it any other way.
nice to hear.
And then the fourth one, usually one would say one's parents. And of course, my parents shaped me. They were remarkable people. Um, but the important thing is that my dad died just past his 50th birthday, and my mother died just past her 100th birthday. And they may have had other dates, but really they were there for each other.
Yeah.
And what shapes me is their life, but I would have to say also their deaths.
Mhm.
My father's death was very sudden. He had smoked 100 cigarettes a day. He didn't drink. I probably had more drink in one night than my father had in his entire life. But he smoked a lot. He ate a lot, and died young at a time when I was starting to make my way in university. My brother was starting to make his way. He'd already become married. It was time for my mother and father to relax and start living their lives, and boom, he was gone. My mother was very
I'm
upset about
imagining in your timeline this would be the 70s. Is that right?
it. That's absolutely right. My dad died on the 21st of September 1971, and my big love affair started in 71 as well. So
Okay.
clearly, as any psychoanalyst will tell you, I killed my father. Just saying. But and
Are you
my
still in
mother
touch with?
died.
Sorry
My
to interrupt.
mother's
Are you,
saying
still in touch with your first love of the 1970s, or is she still?
I was until she died.
Okay.
And I indeed wrote a play about that whole relationship, which was broadcast on Radio 4, called Flying Backwards, in which an actress considerably younger than I am, called Alice Krieger, played her. And
Okay.
I played my younger and older self. And my mother died at the age of 100. She probably never uttered a word of complaint. Her mother was a brilliant violinist. My mother had been a very gifted dancer and was told not to dance because of an operation that she had. She never complained. She's the kind of person who could have looked at this phone and this mic and a fire hydrant and said, "You're doing such a great job. I'm so proud of you." She could have struck up a relationship with anyone at any time. She was a remarkable person. And towards the end of her life, her memory wasn't so good. And when she was 96, I was already having to say, "You've got 2 sons, you've got 6 grandchildren." And she said, 96. No wonder I'm top heavy. And towards the end of her life, she said something which really shapes anything that any artist could want. Because I would talk to her. On one occasion, I visited her and I tugged at her. I sort of squeezed her arm and she said, "Yeah, that got through." And all towards the end of her life, she used to recite this kind of mantra: "Here I am. Here we are. Here I am. Here we are," which after all is all we've ever said, and it's all artists have ever said.
Yes.
And
True.
so those things, that's what's shaped me.
Lovely. Thank you for that. And now we're moving on to 3 things that inspire you. And I appreciate there may be some overlap in what you're talking about, but that's really fine.
Well, I'll start then with, I wasn't going to start with this, but I'm going to start with young people. So that's not just my children. I was lucky enough to interview a rather brilliant scientist, actually, Philip Tobias, and he said, I don't think he ever admitted it. He may have been gay, I don't know. And if he thought that I was maligning him, it's not maligning someone to call them gay, but I would be upset. But he said that all these people are my children. And there's a wonderful play called All My Sons where Arthur Miller has this character saying they're all my children. I'm just really inspired by what young people are doing. I'm inspired by Malala. I'm inspired by my own children. I'm inspired by, yes, that, I mean, the leader in New Zealand is younger than I am. I'm inspired by the fact that there are people who are, taking the world and saying, we've had enough. This has got to happen. This has got to happen. The whole discussion about gender and so on, that's happening with young people. People need to have that choice. I said earlier that the curse of humanity is the external compulsion. It comes from a statement by A.S. Neal, and who established Summerhill, a school where young people were encouraged, to develop themselves. I'm inspired by young actors. I've seen older actors go, "Oh, these young people, they don't know how to do Shakespeare, and they don't know this and they don't know that." But I watch young actors, and I mean their ability to hold a mirror up to nature and their ability to focus and to be real and so on
And to
is
interpret
tremendous.
to interpret afresh with fresh eyes, fresh perspective.
Yes, and so that's tremendous. So that's the first thing. The second thing is going to be obvious, and I'm doing it in reverse sort of from what I wrote, but the second thing is simply people in our business. I entered the theatre and radio and so on when I was a teenager many, many years ago, and the welcome that I had, even though I was from a fairly arty background, but my mother at that time was not an artist. My folks had a watchmaking business. And I was welcomed in. I was shaped by a venue in Cape Town called The Space, which was committed to dismantling apartheid. I used to write my law essays, and I'll come to that in a bit, from The Space. I was shaped by a man called Donald Howarth, who died recently, who was himself and in every way like a very tender, not a tree trunk that's brittle and can break, but like a very green shoot that can wave in the breeze and in the wind. And he was like that until he died in his late 80s recently. I was inspired by Arthur Miller, whom I met briefly once, and who talked about his integrity. He didn't use that word about himself when it came to the McCarthy trials and so on. The ability to take stories and to use what was there to make a kind of poor theatre at the Space. I saw the first performance ever of Sizwe Banzi is Dead at the Space in Cape Town. And so I was shaped by a determination which I've kept with me all my life to, I suppose, be anarchistic in the sense that I hate bullies. I've always wanted to speak truth to power. I've always liked cartoons and comedy, as you know.
Yeah.
And so there's no doubt that the storytelling element in life has certainly inspired me. And from the time I was a teenager, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. My first training was in the law. And so that was the first thing that inspired me. I'm very angry with Perry Mason because he never lost a case. And I can tell you he'd have lost a lot of cases in South Africa. But yes, my aunt and uncle were opposed to apartheid, and that inspired me. But in the sense, I'm going to tell you a story because it happened literally within the last couple of days. I wrote to my professor, John Dugard, who didn't know me. I was one of, a big group of people in a lecture hall. But a friend of mine, who's a law professor now, was mentored by John Dugard. And so I wrote to him and said, you're an inspiring figure in my life. And
You did this very recently, did you? You said
within the last 5 days.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, literally, I got the reply Sunday, Monday. This is a guy who prepared us to understand what is meant by the rule of law. Very relevant today, very relevant as we face an election in the United States. The rule of law, the Constitution, human rights, democracy, what you can and can't do, how the law is a framework, obeying laws, even if it isn't to interrupt, these things inspired me. And I wrote to him and I received a reply saying it's good to be remembered. I mean, this is a man who's made himself very unpopular. I'm not going to go into the countries that he's supported and has not supported, but he was implacably opposed to apartheid. And he and another man called Barend van Niekerk, who was also one of my lecturers when I was a student, Barend van Niekerk would come in and say, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the special branch. I hope you've got that recorded and written down." I was already working in the theatre, and Professor Dugard wrote this and said, you probably made the right choice. I think I found a different kind of justice through storytelling. But the
Yes, and I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by you finding a theatre, the space, as a space for advocacy, different to being a lawyer. You're using storytelling to advocate, to bring about societal change through the crafting of the story.
That's right, and the way the story was told, because yes, exactly. I mean, I was lucky. Donald Howarth was doing a play called Othello for Whites Only. I'll give you the Afrikaans, which is Othello slechts blankes, which means, because apartheid meant that, black people couldn't sit on park benches, they couldn't go into post offices, they couldn't swim, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that with white people. That's what separation was. That's what apartheid was. And so Donald Howarth, my beloved, brilliant friend, who, as I said, died this year, Donald did a play in which Othello doesn't appear. And Donald being Donald and being even more of an anarchist even than I, and he had a protruding lower jaw, Donald, and he'd say, well, I've got rid of Othello, and I mean, he's so fucking boring. It's very good, without him. I've got another cat. I've got the young lord comes on, and the young lord would come on and say what Othello would have said had he been there. And it was just, I suppose it was the ability to take something and understand. So some time ago, I wrote a paper. It was regarded as an academic. It wasn't really an academic paper. But I was asked about human rights and the law and the arts. And, there's an example of some Emperor Charles, the blah-de-blah-de-blah, who remembers, but who visits Titian, and Titian drops his paintbrush, and the emperor picks up the paintbrush and gives it to Titian. That's kind of the way round that I think it should be. And I've always loved the little anecdotes that one hears. The playwright Jean Ennui once said to his friends, the musicians, why the fuck were you playing when the Nazis were here in France? What were you doing playing music for them? And one of his friends said, yes, sir, I know, I played for the Nazis, but I always played a little out of tune. And so those little anecdotes and those little things that happen where it's just a small anecdote or a meaningful thing. I'll give you a couple of more examples.
It's like a tilt. It's making me think of a tilt in the universe. People just there to just enable a slight tilt.
Yes, and to see it in a different way. There was a book written by a guy I sort of knew. I don't know if it became a bestseller. It was certainly, it had notoriety to say, which is Every Joke is a Tiny Revolution. And at one time I used to collect little posters and things like that. But I have memories, and one of them I put in my play, one of my plays where at a small railway station just outside Johannesburg, there was a sign. And there were two bridges, a bridge, a solid bridge made of cement and bricks and so on, very good repair. And it said Europeans cross here, and another one which was made of wooden slats and rope, and it was very, very wonky. And it said natives cross here. And it was the natives cross here sign was altered to read Africans cross here. And then another sign read, it was altered again to read Africans very cross here, and that kind of thing, going around from just outside the city of Johannesburg. If you went north, there used to be a big sign that said "Hang Mandela," and it was there for some time until somebody put up just one other word, and then it read "Hang on Mandela," and those kind of things.
Oh, wow.
They've certainly inspired me a certain, I suppose, understanding. I know that I've been incredibly worthy and earnest, but the fact of the matter is, it was always possible to witness some kind of wit, whether it was on the side of the nationalists, of the Afrikaners. There's one guy who went very left-wing later in life, a guy called Botha, one of the many Botas in South Africa, Puk Botha. He came and made a speech to us, and we all hissed him. This was at the university. We all hissed him, and he said, "That is what I'd expect from a generation of vipers." And we couldn't help it. We applauded him because he was.
That was a good heckler put down.
Yeah, he was in a minor way funny, but the ways in which people at the space and elsewhere took things, and Jerry Lewis, who I've never understood what the French see in him and everything, except once he came to South Africa, and there was no television at that time, only radio, and he did a mime which made the audience laugh, and of course he was doing it deliberately. And then at one point he came up to the mic and said, "The government is listening," and things like that. So people who had an ability to be subversive, that was great. Yes. I'll tell you one other story, which was a man called Paddy O'Byrne, who was a station announcer on one of the big South African radio stations, and he made the following announcement. The Prime Minister had been killed. It was 1966, and he said, because of the assassination of the Prime Minister, there has to be a vote among the cabinet ministers and the members of Parliament to elect a new Prime Minister. That is, the result of it will be broadcast in a few moments, and there is no coincidence in the fact that the show that has been cancelled was Pick of the Goons.
Oh, wow.
Now, he was suspended for a little while, but that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so there's
yeah,
a
yeah.
certain wonderful subversion.
I was going to say comedy to subvert, exactly. And
Yes,
I've got very intrigued by, comedy as catharsis during lockdown as well, which is why I got going with lol virus, actually. But that's sort of by the by, but that resonates well.
yes. I mean, there's a story of a comedian during the Nazi years, and he goes out, I think in Germany, I think it may be Austria or something, and he goes out and he puts his hand up, not in the stop sign Nazi salute, but in the raised arm, as if, may I leave the room salute. So he
Yeah.
does this Nazi salute. He just walks out and does that, and the entire audience stands up and does the salute. And he says, I want to tell you, the snow was that high. Telling you, so those kind of things. I know we've gone down this route, but you did ask what's inspiring. And when it comes down to it, however funny and jokey things can be, and they're all, and as a matter of fact, not so long ago, I went to visit two people who are now dead. One was a wonderful guy called Hugh Lewin, and one was who was in prison with my uncle, and one was a guy called George Bezos, and they both told me that my uncle would always tell stories, and of course his stories were always pretty jokey. I remember one he told me was why do the security police always come to your house in threes? Because one has to be able to read, one has to be able to write, and one has to keep his eye on the other two intellectuals. And so or you could say on the two intellectuals, not the other. But those kind of things, that's just been the path that we've gone on with this conversation,
Yes. Oh, you've suddenly disappeared. Have you done
Yes,
something?
I know. It's the special branch.
It, you're scrolling in a very enigmatic sort of time tunnel.
Yes, it's
time
not.
machine.
It doesn't. I don't know why. It
I can,
sometimes happens.
I can still hear you though.
Yes, good. Well, I mean, I do have another visual thing. I'll.
We can sort of stop and start if you want to, although it's quite good if you can try and get it back. But I quite enjoy the sort of quirks of Zoom and what happens.
Yes. Well,
And I was thinking of Peter Brook's The Empty Space, which inspired me for this idea of the space and the clearing and just a space to just be clear and invent. So it's the idea of a comedy improvisational space that's brimming and charged with potential where anything is possible. So I'm loving listening to the idea of how to usurp with story.
yes. I mean, I don't know why, because it's certainly showing here that I'm connected. You can hear me, though, of course. You just
Yes.
can't see me.
So
Well,
if you've got something visual you need to do, I've now got a tile saying Jack Klaff. Thank you.
yeah, because I've turned. How's
Oh.
that?
He's back in the room. There you go. So I think that's a beautiful segue into, if we've now done the three inspires, it's now two things that never fail to grab your attention. Jack Klaff.
Well, I thought about this in a range of ways, and in the end, I just said genius, because that really unites a lot of things that I haven't mentioned. The first thing I haven't mentioned is sport. I've been lucky enough to see Graham Pollock hit a century. I saw Tendulkar hit a century. I played football with Stanley Matthews. You probably haven't even heard of him. Most
I
of your
have.
Well, I played, and I've witnessed. I've watched so many sporting events. I'm bored by a lot of sporting events, but when they're great, they're really great. And I watch them in the States. I've sat in so many bars watching, basketball, baseball. I now understand, because I was in Illinois. I went on a tour of America, and I watched a lot of baseball in bars. And when you watch baseball in bars, you see what the triumphs and the disasters are, because they applaud so much, and football and so on. So, but also genius. I've been lucky enough to interview maybe 5 Nobel Prize winners. I've worked with a lot of really brilliant people. And by the way, the lauded writers and certainly the lauded actors of our generation are not the ones that I necessarily
Yeah.
idolize.
Yeah, shall we
I've
say.
watched an awful lot of people who are immensely famous and thought, oh, do stop that. Please stop that. That's just, do you really need to do that? And then, you know, I watched all sorts of people do Shakespeare. Richard Pascoe really did it for me. And, you know, there's been an odd moment. I once asked somebody who'd worked at the Royal Shakespeare lot how many minutes, total minutes of real truth she had experienced at the Royal Shakespeare Company. She said, oh, under 5 minutes.
Wow, wow, wow.
But there are people who can give you genius. I saw Peter O'Toole actually in Bristol, and he had genius about him and so on.
Yes.
So,
And of course, his mentor was Nat Brenner, who was one of our teachers in Common at the Old Vic Theatre School.
yes, I mean, I did a speech about Nat, which Erica Newman asked me to give, and I described Nat because I met Nat for coffee. I'd gone back to the theatre a few times, and one day I took him for coffee to the Cardoma. He said, "I've just seen a dog." He said, "It was very fierce." He said, "When the danger was gone, that's when it barked. So it waited for the shit to go by. That's when it went off like that." Reminded me of O'Toole.
Okay.
And the other thing, which is going to surprise you really, is anything can be just a moment of joy. So I've been lucky enough with my kids, you know, I would go for a walk and I'd say, we're not, you know, this walk, we have to find 15 and we choose a number of how many surprising and interesting things we were going to spot.
15's raising the bar quite high, I have to say.
12, 20, depends how long the walk is.
Yeah.
But, you know, anything can be really fascinating.
Provided you're present, because the real through line here is when you're truly present to something, it can be genius. When you're truly present to something, it can usurp. You know, presence is a lovely theme that I'm hearing, reading.
That's right. I mean, being there, and I know you do a lot of improv, and I don't. I mean, I do a lot of improv when I'm preparing a show, and I do play off the audience, and you know, the mood that we've got into is the result of the exchange. It could have gone any number of ways, but you know, just anything. You go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's fine. Oh, yes, then that can be inspiring. Now that is informed by a lifetime of other stuff that one has done.
Yeah. Yes, like preparing your entire moment for now. Preparing your entire life for this moment is what true presence is really all about.
Yes, I think that's true. And, you know, if I take, you know, any given day, if I took you through any given day, you would find it, you know, pretty bizarre because I'm preparing a solo piece about war and peace, and after a lot of reflection and thought, I've decided
about the whole Tolstoy sort of tome. You're preparing a piece.
Yes, the tome, but also films that have been made of it.
Yeah.
So I might be giving my Audrey Hepburn because she was a sort of rather interesting Natasha. But the idea that actually, and this is going to sound very trite, but I don't mean to.
It's very playing against type, dear, to be Audrey Hepburn. I love that.
Yes, no. But also, I saw Stormy Daniels on a chat show going to some detail about Donald Trump's dick and describing, you know, that it had a mushroom thing and so on. And they brought on it was Jimmy Kimmel. He brought on a selection of penis shapes.
As you would. And I don't know how we got here.
And she pointed to a very, very small sort of button mushroom penis. And I had already decided before I saw this that Napoleon would be depicted as Herbert Lom vocally, but as a penis physically. So it would be a physical penis and Herbert Lom. I just
Just while you're there, Herbert Lom's son, I know he's now deceased, heard one of my episodes of the Good Listening To podcast, a chap called Reg Starkey, and was full of admiration for the structure that lies within. So it's just a really interesting parallel.
Well, Herbert Lom, it's very unfair on Herbert Lom because for the benefit of Herbert Lom's son, I want to say he was really brilliant. He was a wonderful actor. He was really good as Napoleon in
Yes,
a very strange film. And of course, he went on to do all those
Mr. Pink
brilliant
Panther.
comedic
Yeah,
performances.
yeah, that's what
He was a true, But anyway, to answer your question, anything. So if I say, so that was this morning. Then I've been asked to play Einstein in a play, and that happened, lunchtime-ish. Then I had a long conversation with the tax man and saved myself thousands thanks to my education because I did a law degree with some accounting. And now each of those things is really interesting.
Yes.
Last night I watched the Borat film for the second time with my daughter. It's a very good thing to watch with your daughter and her boyfriend.
The most recent one, you mean? The recent
Yes,
one?
the most recent one. I've seen it
Yeah,
twice now. But I
wonderful.
mean, what I'm saying is, in any given day, I think that would be pretty surprising. You
So
know
although you
what?
said you're not good at improvisation, your entire day's existence is one of bring it on, yes, and improvisation. What's next? What's next?
Yes, I mean, I really love improvisation, and I haven't I haven't done that much of it live. Once or twice I've been involved in it, and I've enjoyed it.
And I was trying to
But
get you to come to France, where I do the Instant Wit Laughter Lab once a year. Do you remember that? So whilst we were connecting about a year ago, it's been postponed this year because of COVID, but it's happening again next May. So I'll sort of start breathing down your neck again to see if I can get you to come and do the Instant Wit Laughter Lab in France.
yes, I mean, I love that. As a matter of fact, I would say, you see, in certain circumstances, it's different with a family. It's different when you're cooped up together because sometimes you can be very tiresome and and your act has to change. But just to take an example of something not quite as domestic, but I did a 7-month tour of America with actors and to the tech staff as well. But there were 7 of us, and I'm far older than really pretty much double the age of even the oldest in that group. And I found that just having fun at all times when I was with them, because I was alone quite a lot of the time, because they want to do what they want to do. They're younger and they wanted to do stuff. And I was writing all the time. I was on tour. But with these people, I found that there was something that I could go with.
You could riff
And it's
along.
it's a certain
Yeah.
bonhomie, and it is to do with, I suppose, just being lucky enough, and that may well be in the genes, lucky enough to be, a positive person and yeah, exactly, a yes and. So in life, I think that's true. The phone rings, you go, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Last week, there was an attempt to scam me twice, and I was staying with a friend. I haven't been out much, but I was staying with a friend in Oxford actually, and witnessed an attempted scam on her. But long story short, yeah, I'm with you. Improv. I think that is the way to live your life.
With an
Yes,
unbounded
and
optimism.
be ready
Exactly.
for anything,
Yeah.
and I suppose there's nothing so serious that it can't be joked at, really. And there's and if you're ready for anything, and you kind of expect stuff sometimes to be bad, sometimes to be good, you can get through it. I'll tell you one quick story. My late mother-in-law was an incredibly strict person. She terrified people. I was lucky because I got through to her over time. She liked the fact that I was married to a daughter. She liked that, and she could see that I'm not a brave person, but I was at least jokey with her. And anyway, one day she coughed, and there was a lot of reverence around her. Even though she'd been such a strict, strange person, there was a lot of reverence around her. And she she pointed to her throat, and there was stuff in her throat, and she said scrotum.
Oh,
Now, she meant to say sputum, but nobody noticed. And you talk about listening. I mean, we went for a meal afterwards, all of us who were in the room, and then people laughed. But there's a certain, I suppose, vigilance when you hear. those little quirky things.
Well, listening out for surprise, I suppose. Because interestingly, adaptability, that the spin on the Darwinian quote, if it's not so much the survival of the fittest, it's the most adaptive and responsive. So I found that the pandemic period has armed me very well through my comedy improvisational lens, because I've lent in or fallen upwards to adaptability in adversity. So my LOL virus group and even this podcast have come about as a surprise to me, because I didn't even know the idea was percolating until I was faced with this situation. So being adaptive is a good thing.
Yes, exactly. I mean, exactly. And, we're all, people are doing that in all sorts of different ways. Necessity is the mother of invention. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think that's a good thing. Those people who are, sitting down and saying, "Oh, I wish," and "Oh, isn't it terrible?" and all those kind of things.
Yes.
I have a lot of sympathy for them in one way, but it's just not the way I'm made, and I've been very lucky. It's a combination of being proactive and just being ready and saying, well, that'd be interesting. I have a friend whose life's had its ups and downs for her. She's a Shakespeare expert. We're going to do some Shakespeare conversations. And when I talk to her, first of all, she's incredibly knowledgeable. And secondly, she's pretty pissed off about the way Shakespeare's been handled through years. Well, this is a golden opportunity to say, and it's not just because there's a plague, although Shakespeare mentions plague and lived through plagues, and actually mentions plagues far less than you would expect, given how many plagues he lived through. I mean, when Mercutio says a plague on both your houses, it's much more meaningful in those days than it has been down the centuries. But I mean, good for you that it's really, good for you that you've said, look, I'm an improviser. I do this and I do that. I mean, who taught you improv at Bristol?
It wasn't really taught at Bristol, to be fair. I think I found it and discovered it later.
Oh, we had a guy called David Salter. And
John Hartock, who I've interviewed already, he did do some improvisation, but it wasn't comedy improvisation. So I was introduced to the notion of improvisation through my drama teacher training. And then the Old Vic Theatre School was much more traditional of its time. But I stumbled into comedy improvisation later on, actually. And then now form a company that I've been running for 23 years doing it.
Well, it's great. I mean, I think it's tremendous. And, a lot of people, I know a lot of people who do that. And I've been to see a lot of productions, to do with improv, and I've enjoyed them all. David Salter was a rather remarkable teacher. I really liked him. One or two people had little run-ins with him, or at least one guy had a run-in with him of some kind. But he was very, very, I thought he was very interesting, because he would give us scenarios to improvise and play around with. And I've been
back to the school subsequently to teach it myself occasionally. But
have you?
Comedy improvisation, and the mindset of yes and I use perpetually in my facilitation and coaching work as just a really good starting point.
Well, that's fantastic, and I believe it in life. I think it's a really important thing in life. Presence, understanding, what the moment is, all those kind of things. The way I've used improv is I very often don't write my pieces down initially. I'll have a lot of texts, and then I'll have a director and improvise them. And I've had some extraordinary moments. I mean, one of the things that shaped me, I suppose, was I was going to be a lawyer, and Miss Kane was my Latin teacher. And for some reason, she didn't altogether trust me. So she told the science master that I didn't know what I was doing when I was weighing some things in science. Actually, my dad had taught me how to weigh things. And so I got 50% when I should have got 100%. So that's one reason why I'm really pretty pissed off with Miss Kane. But at one point, I asked her why the verb to be does not take the accusative case. And she looked at me and, she gave a little...
Yeah.
And it was pretty destructive. I used to get 99% for Latin. From then on, I got 60
And
till I
just
went to
talk me
uni.
through what's to be in the accusative case. Just
So why does, I'll explain that in a moment. Um, in our culture, which is the Greco-Roman culture, you cannot say, I am you. In many cultures that are not Greek and Roman, what we sometimes call the Orient or Asian cultures, Buddhism, I'm talking about, and other thought thought systems, you can say I am you. You can say I'm you. We are part of a collective, and I am you. So when Miss Kane couldn't explain why you can't say I am you in Latin, she wasn't just talking about a linguistic problem. She was going as deep as it's possible to go, or I was, unwittingly, into an entire worldview. And in the 1980s, I was doing a show about a psychoanalysis analysis process. I was playing a psychoanalyst. I was advised by a cousin of mine who is a psychoanalyst, and I was working with a director, and I was in the rehearsal room. And I suddenly remembered Miss Kane, and I suddenly went, why does the verb to be not take the accusative case? Now, the character I was developing was a Czech. He wasn't a South African, being taught by Miss Kane. But when I went through it, I said, what are you talking about? Of course, I am you. We're in it together. That's a worldview that has been militated against by a Cartesian way of thinking. In other words, we have separations. We're apartheid.
and in the actor's canon, I am you is role reversal, or it's the idea of taking on a character to be someone else, or it's about empathy, understanding and appreciating another human being's perspective.
Exactly, and that, although I mean my character wasn't an actor, but that's right. I will become. I am you. But for me, it was also you can be subjective and objective at the same time. When we laugh,
Yes.
when you see a joke, you can objectively see it's funny, and subjectively find it funny.
And then if you're doing that in an audience situation, that's we are us. We are enjoying this moment of gold together. We are us. So there is a way of unanimity and enjoyment sort of thing.
That's right, but you can have the subjective person who says, "I don't find that funny," and doesn't laugh. But
Yes.
the
Everyone's a critic.
unifying element of it was actually rather profound, and it was part of this thing of, to what extent am I you? And then subsequent to that, I did a show about quantum mechanics. And since that show, any number of physicists have told me don't get mystical or any of those kind of things. But the idea that, we are all participants in a universe was very interesting to me, and I had a sort of joke thing about that. That who do you work for? Do you work for ICI? No, I work for UCU. Where do you work? Oh, not the FBI, the FBU, and things like that. So I did I've got
Yes.
me under my skin and those kind of things. So, I played around with it, but it was inspiring because I suppose a lot of our work is to find those moments when our hearts open, and also a lot of work, including Louise Gluck, who just won the Nobel Prize for Literature. She was very happy when she started to get published because, she had revenge on the people at school.
Get in. Now, if I may, I'm just going to start to manage time slightly because we could talk forever. I'm getting that feeling in a good way because this is really very spontaneous. We're going along an open road here. So if I can bring us back into the clearing just to talk about a surprising, quirky or unusual fact about you that we couldn't possibly know until you tell us.
Well, I mean, the thing is that a lot of people know this, and that is that my father fixed Nelson Mandela's watch. Now, tell me if you knew that. You
I,
didn't.
you did tell me that you might bring that up, so I knew. This is not for my benefit; it's for the listeners' benefit. So, That's a really lovely, quirky, unusual fact. Your father fixed Mandela's watch.
Yes, before the sentence began. But I mean, there's other things, you know. I like every kind of music except Kumbaya.
That can whistle Dixie by the fireplaces round the bonfires of the land. You don't want to be singing Kumbaya.
My daughter's been known to put Kumbaya on,
Just to
you know,
spite
when
me.
I'm least expecting it on the thing. I don't like a song that's got the chorus Valderie, Valdera, Valda ha 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 ha. I don't like that. And I don't mind other pieces of music. I'm not crazy about organ music, but there is a version of a musical song sung by Perry Como, and it goes like this. The best of times is now, and he sings it so mournfully that I don't like it.
So you just think, shut up, Perry, when he starts singing that.
Yes, I've also been known
But you're giving me lots of answers again. We only need one quirky or
well, I'm going
unusual
to give
fact.
you one other. I sometimes read Daniel Steele.
I love that. We'll let that float there. And by the way, musical taste. There are certain forms of improvised jazz that make my teeth itch, and I just get very stressed. So I do relate to there's certain music. I love lots of music, but there's certain music I'm thinking, no, shut up, stop. Because
Well, I mean, and you know, the thing is, the comic relief has now stopped people going to Africa, much to my satisfaction. But you know, because I grew up in Africa, when I hear white people going ba ba da doo 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 ba ba. Even Humphrey Lyttelton, whom I really adored, I do have a funny feeling about white people doing jazz and stuff like that. So I have funny, quirky things, but generally speaking, very open about music.
lovely. And so now, again, we'll make our answers shorter and pithier in how we're going towards the resolution. So,
Yes.
alchemy and gold, when you're at purpose and in flow, as Jack Klaff, the academic, the writer, the actor, the raconteur, what's the alchemy and gold that you most like to bring, would you say?
Oh, well, it's what you're talking about, receptivity, listening, and you know, I'm very happy with my own company. So I suppose it's what's just happened now. Receptivity, anything at all. So the fact that you're there and that we've done this, and as long as you're happy with the way it's gone, that's the alchemy. I'm happy too.
So there's reciprocity. Your alchemy is like reciprocity. What you give out, you'll get back, and the idea of being able to connect.
Yes, I mean, yes, I think that's tremendous. Quick anecdote, I did a show in 1994 called Making Connections. There were two people in the queue outside. Reader, they got married. They met in the queue and got married.
And your show was the conduit to connect. So it was your show. They came to see your show. They met in the queue and they got married. Or is that what the play was
Well,
about?
they do still come and see my work and have indeed brought their daughter, who's
I love that.
training to be an actor and an acting teacher.
Beautiful. And I'm going to award you with a cake now, Mr. Jack Klaff. And again, this is a metaphor for you to interpret. So the cake is yours, and there's a cherry to be put on the cake, which is what is the legacy of this conversation you'd like to leave. It could be the best advice you've ever been given, a favourite inspirational quote, advice to a younger self, however you'd like to interpret it. What's your cherry on the cake going to be?
Well, first of all, in our house, we say cake because we like it so much. It's got its own note. The second thing is, I would say, in this time, I would say, count not the days, let the days count.
Boom.
I would also say that King Solomon had a ring, and inside the ring were the words, "This too shall pass."
Both beautiful. Let them float there. Penultimate statements. Anything else you'd like to say as a result of our having spoken together?
Well, I liked what you were talking about you know, that now is a spurious concept, but that whatever happens, just take it and run with it, you know. And that's something that has come to me because, you know, I love to think, oh, I'm so intellectual, really. But I'm a jock, My friend Trish, who was at school with me, who's still a mate of mine, who has more letters after her name than in her name, remembers me as a jock. I played rugby, I swam, and that's the great image for me is a slip fielder. Whether you're waiting for a child's question or something unexpected or an opportunity, catch that damn ball.
Catch that damn ball. Beautiful. Thank you for listening to the Good Listening To podcast with my very wonderful guest, raconteur, actor, and South African-born awesome pants, Mr. Jack Klaff. Thank you very much indeed. Good night.
Good night.